an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J. Henry Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to Researcher on a Mission. That's right, ROAM Radio. I am your host, Dr. J. And as always, we have an incredible show for you today. Remember, everybody, this is the People's Show, which means who you ask for, I bring to you. And today's guest is someone that you have all been asking me for quite some time, and finally we have him. Obviously, if you've been keeping up on the advertisements, you'll know who he is. And if you don't know, then you'll be surprised in a minute or so. First, let me just tell you about some breaking news. Dr. Greer did his CE5 6-day event last week and captured some amazing footage in Florida. It is available at his website, SeriousDisclosure.com, and it's basically two giant orbs floating right above the ocean. I can't explain it, but there could be an explanation. Who knows? It's for researchers to decide. Also, this is also breaking news, of course. This strange creature filmed in Indonesia that is scaring plantation workers. And first, when I looked at this, the person who brought it to my attention, my good old friend and co-host Johnny Webb of the Thursday show, I said it's a tiger. But then I looked closer. It looked like it had human-looking some type arms. It's just really bizarre. I want you all out there to check it out. Again, just Google strange creature freaks out plantation workers, and it's in Indonesia, but I don't have the city name for you. And the final piece I want to tell you about is the volcanic island, a volcano that erupted in Iceland. That is a beautiful sight if you haven't seen it, and I would not be surprised if it is being monitored by extraterrestrials, as we have two great UFO photos, one by Jaime Maussan. Actually, he's provided us with two, and of course, the other one by Stanton Friedman. So I think those are great anomalies. I also want to tell you all that I hope you enjoyed the Dannion Brinkley interview last Thursday. That will be uploaded on YouTube soon. And what is uploaded right now is the Dr. Greer interview, as well as the John Lear and Richard Dolan. And speaking of Dolan, he will be back. And let me tell you, everybody who has confirmed since the last time I was on air, of course, you know already, Eric Von Daniken and Sean Stone are on this Thursday. Michael Tellinger, that's right, Michael Tellinger will be joining us right here exclusively on Dark Matter, where Rome is now an exclusive show, as well as Dr. Bob Wood. He is known worldwide for documents, for proving documents that link the UFO conspiracy and finding them in the archives, National Archives. And then there's so many more. Giorgio Tsoukalos, we're picking a date, but he will be on in the next couple months, as well as Edgar Mitchell. He can't be live, so I pre-recorded him, and it'll be a surprise day. But who is going to be live is astronaut Story Musgrave, so you can't miss that as well. And finally, I want to tell you, my good friend, Congressman Merrill Cook. He was on the committee of the citizen hearing. And again, back by popular demand to take your calls. So those are the news. Everybody, go to drjradiolive.com. And again, all the social media accounts, you go on and you can find them under the same account, DRJ Radio Live. I see we already have a caller, but I'm asking this caller to please call back during hour 2. We will definitely be taking your calls during hour 2. I'm going to go ahead and answer them and tell them, caller, please call back an hour from now, and you are more than welcome to speak to our guest. And the guest we are about to announce is the one and only William Henry. He's a world-renowned researcher who has literally lectured all around the world and has come across some stunning information. And again, he is brought back. He's been on my list. We did an amazing interview last year, and you guys wanted him, and I brought him back because you asked. So you are in for a treat. Mr. Henry, welcome to the show.
Hello, Dr. J. Thank you so much for having me back, and thank you, everybody, for listening.
Oh, it is an honest pleasure to have you back. It's never boring with you. You always have up-to-date information. And let me throw out there too, people out there, if you want to follow William Henry's information, up-to-date info is posted at williamhenry.net. Now, let's talk about something. This is what I like. When we were talking off air, I thought I misread something. I thought I read singularity to say skingularity or to skingularity. And I was confused. And I remember I asked you about that. And then I went ahead and I continued to read. And I realized that it was a term you coined. Now, I've always known singularity to be of essentially the artificial machines taking over or the artificial intelligence taking over our intelligence. So I'd like to go to you and ask you basically, what is singularity? And tell us how you came to that term and the concept behind it.
Well, since my best-selling book, Cloak of the Illuminati, which was published in 2003, I've been tracking an intentional confluence of four technologies. There was a mega conference in Hawaii in 2002 that resulted in a major government publication that advocated the convergence of genetic technology, nanotechnology, neuroscience, and computer technology with big pharma thrown in. And essentially what they concluded in this report is that these four technologies, bits, atoms, neurons, and genes, or what I call BANG, will all become one seamless technology that is aimed at the human skin. The U.S. government literally advocates the creation of a new layer of human skin composed of these technologies that will wire every individual to what they refer to now as the Internet of Things, which is a network of literally presently around 25 billion smart things that inhabit the planet along with us, and soon, by 2020, will probably number more like 50 billion smart things. And effectively, what this report said is that the U.S. government, as well as the digerati, the Silicon Valley, the gods of Silicon Valley, Shanghai, Tokyo, and elsewhere, effectively view human beings as things that need to be improved. The human body needs new apps that will make it smart, that will then wire us to this grid. And this all plays into that term you described as the singularity, when the machines take over, when all of a sudden artificial intelligence exceeds human intellectual capacity and control, and we have a new civilization event that is called the singularity. And I decided to add the letter K in there and coined the term the skingularity, because all of this ultimately is aimed at our skin and implanting this technology within or beneath actually our skin.
One thing this intrigues me is I've spoken to, of course, several abduction specialists. That's one thing that always intrigues me, because I think the people that are taken and have contact really are the ones we should be asking questions about rather than the ships we're looking at. And a lot of them say that the extraterrestrials take pieces of skin from them, and whatever they take from them, human cells, they actually put such a small piece on their skin directly to regenerate. Do you think there's any correlation with what a lot of these people who have been taken say with what's happening? Because this sounds exactly like it, applying technology directly onto our skin to regenerate us.
Well, it sounds exactly like that. And one of the things that I got into in my book, The Watchers, Lost Secrets of the Watchers, Ascension, Resurrection, and Perfection, is that from virtually time immemorial, there has been an interest in skin, human skin. Jewish mysticism teaches that our coats of skin actually cover our original light bodies, and that originally humans were beings of light. And then a force came upon the planet that influenced us, led to what the Judeo-Christian tradition refers to as the fall. Before this time, we lived in what a place described as Eden, which appears to be more like a zone of frequency of light and love. after the fall were evicted from Eden, and this is when humankind is given coats of skin. And these coats of skin are almost become described almost similar to the way we think of orange prison jumpsuits. They're not our original habitat, and they perform a protective function for us, but they may also, in fact, be some sort of a penal system, as a matter of fact. And part of what especially Jewish mysticism focuses on is the reacquisition of our original shining bodies, garments of light, bodies of light, robes of glory, crowns of glory, robes of honor. These are terms that are used by the Jewish mystics and that spilled over then into Christian mysticism that describe our original state.
One thing I noticed is obviously our technology is really advancing at a rapid rate, but the military technology is at least a decade ahead of us. But the Black Ops technology, things that the Navy SEALs and Special Forces use, is several decades ahead of us. So it sounds to me that at our rate, what we see going on is clearly not the rate of what's really behind the doors and clearly reaching this level of this artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And of course, publicly, it's DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, that drives this technology and is driving not only the singularity, but also the skingularity. And so we can just kind of only try to envision where they must be at now. If we're less than probably 5 years from the skingularity, and I actually created a skingularity doomsday clock modeled after the doomsday clock, which I should mention, you might be aware that the doomsday clock was just pushed forward to 3 minutes to midnight. It was at 4 minutes to midnight. And what pushed it to 3 was climate change, nuclear proliferation, IT, which is our internet technology, information technology, and artificial intelligence. So there's this public recognition that, hey, we're getting really close to midnight here on the doomsday clock, where we have perhaps even an extinction level event. So watching this is very important for us, and I'm trying to call people's attention to this right now, because a lot of people have, we've been talking about implanting chips and the rapid acceleration of technology for a number of years, but I'm not sure that most people are aware just how fast this technology is accelerating at this moment.
I'm glad you mentioned the skingularity clock, because that was actually next what I was going to ask you. But prior to that, I noticed in your lectures that you gave in Munich and London, I believe. Yes, London and Munich, Playing God, as well as The Next Human. People were stunned when they found out the level of advancement that's really going on behind doors. And you said that you're dedicating 2015 to coming up with a plan to essentially a vision of what you think is going to happen and what we can do to protect ourselves personally. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been, again, on this trail for quite a while. In the past couple of years, I've been really focusing on it in presentation and essentially just pulling articles right off the headlines and watching audiences for the first 30 minutes where I go through this acceleration of technology. It's you just watch their faces just get longer and longer, and they practically get to the point where they just say, stop, we can't take it anymore. And all I'm doing is just showing what Apple's doing, what Google's doing, what they're stating publicly, and what people are starting to do around the world in terms of utilizing this technology. And so it became really apparent that we need a way out from this scenario. And I actually got some inspiration for a way out from Carlos Castaneda by way of my research on what's called the rainbow body of light. The Tibetans are one group among many, including the ancient Egyptians and the early Christians and the Jewish mystics, who believe that within us is this light body, rainbow body of light, glory body that's sort of concealed within our skin. And that by awakening the rainbow body of light, it actually creates a field of protection around our body. Carlos Castaneda, in his conversations with Don Juan, described a predator that comes from the cosmos that actually consumes our light body. That in Don Juan's scenario, we're all born with this luminous cloak or garment that surrounds our soul and protects our soul, and in fact surrounds our body. And he describes a group, an extraterrestrial group called the Predators or the Flyers, that correspond very directly with the Gnostic concept of the archons, that consumes this light body and leaves just a very tiny thread. And it's from that thread that we gain our life force. And what Don Juan said is that what we've got to do is learn how to reclaim our light body. And that the hopeful statement that he made was that we don't have to go full rainbow body like the Tibetan monks or like Jesus in his resurrection or Osiris or others. We only have to lift our light body, our rainbow body, just to the level of the toes. And that is enough of a protection to thwart the predators, the flyers, or the archons.
Going back to the clock, the doomsday clock, I remember when it was 5 minutes, and then I remember, of course, when they reset it back to 10, then it went back to 5, then 4, and the fact that it's 3, obviously it's bringing two things. Fear is control, as you know, and that's why the mainstream news, which we obviously try to avoid and try to give people the alternative media networks such as this, which is why they're skyrocketing in popularity, because the CNN and Fox News really doesn't cover the real news such as you're providing to us. But going back to this, the clock, by the government issuing a doomsday clock or using that, they're always keeping people scared. But at the same time, we really do have something to fear. And I don't think people can fathom how bad the fear really is of what can happen. And as you mentioned, an extinction level event, well, those have happened several times, but I'm afraid this time it's going to be caused by us humans.
Yeah, I think, Dr. J, that's a really good possibility. And again, we don't discuss the doomsday clock in order to make to manifest fear or to put people in that kind of state. It's just to raise alarm, literally, that, look, we have turned over our power to these corporations, big pharma, digerati, whatever term you want to use for it. And, like you, I'm 52 years old. I mean, when I grew up, I grew up in a time of a nuclear threat. I was born just after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And now it's man-made things like the climate change, in addition to the nuclear weapons proliferation, information technology security issues, artificial intelligence. It's like, what's next? And this is what we all have to get a handle on right now, is that we've got this runaway technology that in some sense is serving us. The internet is wonderful. I'm not so sure about the Internet of Things. When you have major corporations like Apple, Google, Cisco, Microsoft, and others that view the human body as a thing that needs to be perfected, and they're going to begin playing God with the human body, that raises the stakes even higher, because once we begin to mesh our flesh with this technology, I'm not so sure there's any going back. And what you're going to be creating initially is an elite version of humanity that has access to this technology, that has the longevity, that has the enhanced, perhaps, brain capacity, and some of the other promises that this technology offers. And then you're going to have the rest of the people. And the rest of the people are the 3.5 billion people on the planet right now that aren't yet wired to the Internet, which Jeff Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, has made it his personal goal to wire every single human, to get every single human online, which in the hopes of Facebook and companies like Verizon and AT&T translates into 9 billion phone subscriptions or Facebook members. And you look at this and you think, well, what they're doing is they're putting a premium on people going online. These people that I mentioned, the 3.5 billion people that are online right now, they don't even have toilets. They don't have clean water. And what we're expecting them to do is literally leap 500 years of history, or certainly to skip the 20th century, come right into the 21st century, and be connected to this advanced technology that's supposed to make things easier or better for them. But it has a price. It has a huge price. And we yet haven't been able to really evaluate what that price is. I mean, we living here in the 21st century, we're realizing every day now that everything seems to get more overwhelming, more complicated, and more expensive in all ways. And some believe we've sold our souls for this instant connection. And you have to wonder if that isn't a correct assessment.
I would have to agree there. And I've always been saying that the internet is a double-edged sword. On one hand, we have access such as this. People, rather than the mainstream media networks, the handful of the corporations that control them, censoring news, now someone can be somewhere and film an event, post it on YouTube, and it can go viral before the mainstream media or the government has time to step in and suppress it. But on the other hand, we're feeding them information. And I'm glad you brought up Facebook. And I want to say two things about it. First, we're giving Big Brother information. You're just feeding it to them. They know where you're going with these GPS, with your smartphones everywhere. They know what you're doing by telling them who your friends are, where you're shopping, what you're buying, from everything from Amazon to searches from Google. And the last thing I want to mention is that my brother worked at a big data firm. And essentially one day he came home and described to me, he said, in a couple of decades, we will be able to build you. And I'm like, I'm confused. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, no, we're not going to build a human. He says, but we can, at this point, track what what your next move is, what you're going to think next based on your history. And he said, in a matter of years, this was an example he was giving me, an 8-year-old and doing a science project can rebuild a human in the past by using all the data that we're giving the government. And the one other thing I want to throw in is that an electromagnetic pulse, if we have that, I think that today will be more catastrophic than anything else, because everyone has their money tied up electronically in banks. Everyone is using all these smartphones and computer for communications. What would happen if everyone was all of a sudden knocked out of communications, electricity, had no way to speak to anyone and no way to access any money? Obviously, that would create panic. So I have to agree with you that the internet is something we have to fear. In those countries you mentioned, how can they expect them to skip their basic needs to jump to the 21st century? It is a very, very scary thing. And one thing you also mentioned is these enhanced humans, some people call them 2.0. Do you think it's going to be just those billionaire elites that are controlling essentially everything, the flow of information to what these poor people eat? Because last year alone, in 2014, the top 640 billionaires increased their net wealth by over $500 billion, approximately $1 billion each. Can you imagine that? That's enough to run a country on. And this is the net wealth that they added to themselves.
Yeah, it's incredible. And before we get too far away, Dr. J, I did want to make an additional remark about Facebook and what you said about recreating humans. There's a term that the Digerati use, and that is the term digital ghost. We are all leaving digital ghosts on Facebook. I mean, as we know, every keystroke, every photo we put up, every conversation that we have is of course, recorded by Prism. But every conversation and every photo, every video we place on Facebook is also going to be utilized in a near future point by anticipated artificially intelligent supercomputers that will take all of those photos and reanimate us, create an avatar version of ourselves that will interact with other avatar versions of others, including deceased members of our family, in a simulated reality. That's where they're going with this. So what we see of Facebook today is extremely primitive, as powerful as it is, and as intrusive as it can be, in the sense that we, as you said, we willingly are telling Prism exactly what we're doing, where we're going, what we're spending, and everybody by now sees how they're tracking us with this and how they're beginning to market to us. I mean, if you go onto eBay and you put in a Gibson Les Paul, you're searching for a guitar, the next time you're on Facebook, it's going to be like, hey, how about this Les Paul? How about that Les Paul? You want this Marshall amplifier, that kind of thing. They already know exactly what you're looking for and are able to even anticipate now what you're looking for. And that's their next big leap, is to be able to literally read your mind and know more about you than you know, because their computers are so powerful. But again, where they're wanting to go with this is into a world where they literally will create for us a kind of a warped version of the Judeo-Christian, or especially the Christian version of the book of Revelation, when at the time of the second coming of Jesus, we will be given new bodies of light and will live in a new kingdom of heaven spread out on the earth. This is exactly what the Digerati are promising, that over the course of the next couple of decades, we will more and more cease to identify with our biological body and begin to connect with and build an avatar light body that will inhabit the simulated reality online that they promise will be a much better reality than the biological, or what we think of as the real world. And that's where they're going with this, is ultimately being able to make a backup copy of our brain, then upload that backup copy into our digital avatar, and after that, they're going to convince us that we can dispense with our biological body and inhabit their new kingdom of heaven on earth. This is Apple's vision of the Garden of Eden, ultimately.
You actually brought up exactly what my brother said about them building a human, and that's exactly right. He didn't mean a physical human, just like you just stated about the avatar. This is exactly what the company, when he started in his orientation, told him that what they're going to do with this big data. And I'm glad you mentioned that you search for Les Paul guitars, and next thing you go on Google, they're there for you. Amazon has launched a new program where, rather than using their main hubs, they're building closer hubs in cities so they can ship quicker. And this is what they're doing. Based on all the information we're feeding into the internet and social media and our search engines, they now have books and products in these warehouses that are nearby instead of their main hubs, because they anticipate what you will order. I didn't even think they would get that far now, but that's where they're at right now. That's a scary thought.
Yeah, it is. And it's all the power of the Internet of Things and this connection. And this is the future that we've presently chosen for ourselves. And the problem here is that convenience is one thing, but that convenience is going to very quickly turn into major control if we're not careful. And this is what we really have to raise the alarm bell for here, is to get people to understand that this is what's actually at stake. I mean, we've just now, for the presidential election in 2016, we've already opened up what is going to become the major issue of the next campaign, which is mandatory vaccinations. And you've got the potential candidates already kind of making their claims. Some are coming out for it, others are coming out against it, and what we're starting to see is that this is the next big step is already here. And what it's all about is the complete erasure of the individual and the individual's freedom to choose what they want, because ultimately we're going to be told what we want and what we can have, and limitation will become more and more the norm for more and more people.
I have a question that actually is coming via Skype from a listener here. And essentially it's, let me see if I can phrase it correctly. Are they trying to get our soul, essentially? Are they basically playing body snatchers? Do you think that's the ultimate goal?
I think so. I think that when you can substitute a reality for somebody, whether it be an implantation through a thought or a vaccine or whatever, that has to be the ultimate goal. And I believe that that's what's unfolding right now. And this has been something that isn't new, by the way. I mean, when you go back into the Gnostic text, the text of the Jewish mystics and others of a couple of thousand years ago in Egypt and in Palestine, they were warning about the archons and their use of technology to control the body. But it's not the body so much they want, although they have been, and I think rightly so, accused of harvesting energy from the human body. Ultimately, what they literally want are human souls. This seems to be something that the archons, the predators, as Don Juan called them, the flyers, they lack a soul, and they want to take ours by whatever means possible.
I agree, and that's a scary thought. As a matter of fact, I know we'll get this soon when we get to the Shroud of Turin. When I interviewed Dr. Silverman and, of course, Nigel Kerner, he wrote a book about the gray aliens harvesting souls, and in there, he had a whole section on the Shroud of Turin, and that's where obviously Silverman came through, and Silverman came to interview. But point being is I didn't see the connection before. But obviously, I think that's something we definitely have to worry about, because whether we are doing it, the elite are doing it, or whether some other force out there is doing it is absolutely something to fear. Now, I wanted to move on to ISIS and the apocalypse, because sometimes I wonder, is ISIS propaganda like Al-Qaeda might have been? Because for 13 years, it was Al-Qaeda this, Al-Qaeda that, Al-Qaeda this. And then all of a sudden pops up ISIS, or ISIL, as they call it. Yet this is a big enough threat where they're beheading people. And of course, we are launching airstrikes. And President Obama just asked for the War Powers Act to be enacted by Congress to essentially go into Syria. And I think that will create another big war and possibly be the gateway to Iran. But let's back up a little bit and talk about ISIS and the other Muslims who are fanatical Muslims who are killing in the name of. But the problem is as you know, and you wrote this yourself, is that clearly in the religion of Islam, they already have the Christ, Messiah, and all three religions will basically are using these figures they're together in the Islam. Am I saying that correctly, or can you correct me?
Sure. And thank you for bringing this up, Dr. J, because it's a hugely important subject that isn't discussed very often. I've been looking at this question of end-time prophecy and especially the Ark of the Covenant for a number of years. I started following Saddam and his belief that he was of course, Saddam Hussein, and his belief that he was the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. And I actually broke the story of his interest in Anunnaki Stargate technology. Having been tracing him and profiling him for over a decade, I came to the conclusion before Bush and Cheney were elected, that if those guys got into office, they, as neocons, read the Book of Revelation like a cookbook or a recipe book. They have this idea that they can fulfill biblical prophecy. They can accelerate biblical prophecy. And part of what the Book of Revelation says is that before the Lord can return, Babylon has to be rebuilt so it can be destroyed. And I had gone on record and stated that if Bush Cheney were elected, we would be in Iraq within 6 months to go get what Saddam has been amassing over the past 10 years in terms of ancient Sumerian artifacts, especially Anunnaki technology. Well, I was incorrect. It wasn't 6 months. It took 2 years, but they did it. And the handwriting was on the wall, to use that old Babylonian story. And lo and behold, we have a similar set of circumstances here with ISIS, where you have Shia Muslims who believe in the return of a figure they call the Mahdi. He is the Islamic Messiah. He was prophesied by Muhammad to appear at the end times, and the Shia believe that they can accelerate the return of the Mahdi by creating global chaos. And the thing that intrigued me so much about this, and I was at the time profiling Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, and his belief that he, and his public disclosure and proclamation that he is the earthly representative of the Mahdi, and that the Mahdi had spoken to the Ayatollah Khomeini, the spiritual leader of Iran, and has told him that he will return to Earth during the Ayatollah Khomeini's lifetime. Well, the thing is that the Mahdi is called the Guided One. That's what his name means. And he's called the Guided One because the belief is that he will be guided by Allah to recover and return the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. And he will be assisted by a quite powerful being who is his assistant. His assistant's name is Jesus Christ. So here you have this Shia belief that they can accelerate the return of the Mahdi and also the Ark of the Covenant by creating global chaos. This is the playbook that ISIS fantasizes about. All of their apocalyptic showdowns in northern Syria are right out of Islamic prophecy, where Muhammad proclaimed that certain cities like Dabiq would be important militarily, and all of a sudden we have ISIS making a beeline for this. The prophet predicts the day of judgment will come after the Muslims defeat Rome, in other words, us, in places in Syria and in Turkey. And so here they go, right exactly to those places. So it's only a matter of time now, in my opinion, where they start to or make an attempt to reveal the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the thing is that the Ark of the Covenant is not the Indiana Jones decoy box that everybody is so familiar with. That's the fake Ark of the Covenant. This is the golden box scenario where you've got a basic, kind of an idiot type Moses and Bezalel, the Israelite craftsman, making this golden box, and they think it's like radioactive or some kind of a weapon. That's not the Ark of the Covenant. Israelite specialists know what the real Ark of the Covenant is. And the reason I wrote my book, The Judgment Day Device, which was about this technology, the real Ark, was to call people's attention to this understanding that, hey, you've got not only Saddam Hussein, Bush Cheney, the neocons, but now you at that time you've got Mahmoud Ahmadinejad playing from this same playbook. Now you've got ISIS playing from this same playbook. And my intention is that if any of these guys bring out an Indiana Jones style golden box and try to sell this as the Ark of the Covenant, we know it's a fake. We know it's a total false flag. We know this is effectively some military operation that is trying to just dupe everybody, because the real Ark of the Covenant is something far more profound than that. And so that was my impetus for writing this book, and now for also commenting about what ISIS is doing.
I'm really glad you brought up the Ark of the Covenant, because that was what we spoke about last time. And I think we need to educate these listeners in case they missed that interview then. Essentially, like you said, that golden box that Moses was toting around with the Ten Commandments is a false. And as you mentioned last time, the Ark of the Covenant is really is something. Again, correct me if I'm mistaken. Isn't it something within us, or versus something that we can achieve, such as manifesting results?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that becomes very clear and a tip-off for me in this regard was that when Bezalel, the Israelite craftsman who made the Ark of the Covenant, before he made the Ark, he was given all the wisdom of the universe by the Old Testament God Yahweh. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, well, why would God need to give this craftsman all the wisdom of the universe to make a simple golden box? And that was a tip-off that the Ark is something more. We're talking about a consciousness device. And that started me on a quest to try to gain a better understanding than the kind of popular vision of the Ark. And when you start to look at it from that perspective, you start to see the Ark as a device that is, in fact, some kind of a portal device. When it's in operation, like, for example, when it was housed in Solomon's temple, it was placed in a golden cube-shaped room. It was called a most holy device, which means it had the ability to transmit holiness on contact, or transform a human into a holy being on contact. But more importantly, it was a device that channeled or created a conduit for a luminous humanoid rainbow-like figure that was referred to as the Lord in the Old Testament, or Yahweh. And the thing about it is that when you really get into the Ark symbolism and the research about it, you realize that the Ark of the Covenant is not a device, any kind of a power device. It's powered actually by the power of love rather than the love of power. And so many of the popular books about it describe it as a power object. And they're, in my opinion, these authors are typically didn't go deep enough in their research. They didn't consult the scholars who really know the Israelite symbolism. Some of them, I'm convinced, didn't even read the Bible when they wrote their books. They couldn't have, otherwise they wouldn't conclude what they did about the Ark. And so my thinking is that if the Ark of the Covenant is the ultimate quest of groups like ISIS, or we call them ASL or ASLs here in Tennessee with the thick Tennessee accent, let's really massively educate people about the Ark of the Covenant. And perhaps these people will come to the sense that it's not a power object like they believe, that in fact the only way that they're going to be able to reveal the Mahdi and to return the Ark of the Covenant to earth is through the power of love, not the love of power. And my hope would be that at that point they would stop this nonsense that they're spreading around the planet right now.
I don't want to go back too far, and I want to continue on the Ark of the Covenant, but I do have a question here that is actually from a listener, and let me go back and read it to you directly. It relates back to when we were talking about the Middle East, and it's, do you know about the Stargate keepers being killed in the Middle East?
The Stargate keepers being killed in the Middle East? No, I don't.
I didn't know either. So anyway, that was asked by a listener. So we asked him. Anyhow, let's go back to the Ark of the Covenant, because clearly people don't know what it is. And I'm glad you mentioned it in the Bible, because people forget to realize that although the King James Version was translated, 500 years ago or in that era, the actual Bible itself that was written on the scrolls or papyrus or whatever it was at the time, they had to keep copying it. And of course, it was the New Testament in Greek and the Old Testament in I believe, Hebrew. And each version had to be copied because the actual scrolls that they were writing on were old and they wouldn't last. They wouldn't last a century. So therefore, by the time you got to the level where you can write something and keep it in history further, the things that were in it originally were lost in translation so many times. It's almost as if it went through the telephone game. And I wanted to make that point because I think it's very important. In essence, that could be why the Ark of the Covenant is portrayed wrong. Now let's go dive a little deeper into the Ark of the Covenant. Can you explain to people exactly what it is that we can do and how it's powered? I know you mentioned love, and I know it could help us and to manifest things, as well as, does it have something to do with our chakras, or am I off there?
Yeah, what's interesting about this is, again, this consciousness component. The way I interpret it, Dr. J, is that when, going back to Bezalel, when he constructs the Ark of the Covenant, he is given a blueprint for that device by God, which suggests to me that he probably built this device in his consciousness first. I sort of envision him kind of like an ancient Nikola Tesla. Tesla was supposed to have been able to make 3D models of his inventions in imagination and test them in his imagination. And what I began to notice is that this is kind of a common theme that runs through all who actually utilized the Ark, is that they recognized that this technology was in fact within them. And let me explain how I see this working. When you open the box of the Ark of the Covenant, it has several components within it. It's like a kit of tools. You've got the golden box for certain, and within the box is the rod of Aaron, who's the brother of Moses, and his name means enlightenment. So you've got this enlightenment rod. You've got the 2 tablets with the 10 commandments written on them, supposedly, or they're also thought to contain ascension knowledge. You've got a flask of manna, this celestial or star food that mysteriously fed the Israelites during their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And you've got a jar of anointing oil. This oil is called chrism. And when this oil is anointed on the body, or the body is anointed with this oil, it dissolves the human body into rainbow-colored light, exactly like the body of Yahweh when he manifests on the Ark of the Covenant, exactly like the resurrected or glory body of Jesus. So we're talking about a really profound oil here. And the way I looked at it, based on the way I understand the Israelite symbolism, is that this is a kit of tools that needs to be assembled. And this is something that was different about my approach to the Ark from other popular authors, is that they never assemble the kit. They might mention some of these components that are in the Ark, but they never put them together. So what happens is that you take the Ark, you put the rod of enlightenment on top of the Ark vertically. The 2 tablets go on top of the rod of enlightenment, and now you're starting to assemble the kit. But again, what I am proposing is that there's a biological or physiological aspect or interpretation of these symbols as well. And the way I viewed it was that this platform, the Ark box, is in fact our lower 3 chakras, upon which sit our inner rod of enlightenment, which is, of course, our spinal cord system, which includes the chakras running up and down. You've got the 7 chakras that go from the base area all the way up to the crown at the top of our head. We count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All good children go to heaven. So we start to get this idea that what we're really assembling here is a stairway to heaven, literally. So the rod of enlightenment is our spinal cord. The 2 tablets that are placed on top, those are the 2 hemispheres of our brain. In the center of our brain is a little pot, if you will. We call it the pineal gland. What is the spiritual function of the pineal gland? Well, numerous mystic traditions tell us that it is capable of creating or manufacturing secretions, oils, that can illuminate the body and ultimately transmute it into light. So here's the thing. If you're looking for the Ark of the Covenant as a electrical battery or a weapon system in Ethiopia, you're probably not looking for the inner power structure within you. You're probably not looking to assemble this ascension kit of tools within you and get your own body secreting this oil that will transmute your body into light. And the value of following this approach to the Ark of the Covenant is that ultimately kickstarting this mechanism within us is the greatest force of protection we could possibly create for ourselves. It literally could be a key that will help us to disarm the archons, the predators, the flyers, and other beings that seek to keep us disempowered and constantly chasing our tails looking for decoy Arks of the Covenant in the U.S. Capitol or wherever.
I'm glad you mentioned all the components. First of all, I want to comment on the pineal gland. I heard DMT is one of these secretions we get. And of course, I also hear that it's our spiritual antenna. And I've always firmly believed that we use such a small portion of our brain that, and a lot of people talk about when they are in contact with extraterrestrials, they speak to them telepathically. I've always believed that if we had full use of our brain, that we can actually have that capability along with so many others. Do you believe that if we can activate all of our chakras and use our pineal gland to its fullest extent, that we can get to such abilities?
Yeah, I totally believe that. In fact, have you seen the movie Lucy?
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking about that as you mentioned.
Yeah, so the premise is she's a 25-year-old college student or something like that. Her boyfriend tricks her into carrying some drugs for a drug lord, a Taiwanese drug lord, who opens her body up and plants this this growth hormone that explodes within her, and suddenly she starts massively accelerating her brain potential, going past 10%. And the premise of the movie is what happens when she gets to 100% of her brain capacity. And I thought it was a really excellent contemplation of these questions. I didn't agree with how robotic they had her becoming instantly. I mean, I feel like once we can tap 20% of our brain, we're certainly not going to behave robotically like she was portrayed in the movie. But that's really neither here nor there. I mean, I really feel like as we use more of our brain capacity, that we're going to become beings of greater compassion and greater love. At least that's my hope. But what happens in the movie is that when she crosses 40% of her capacity, she's on an airplane, and at that moment, and all of a sudden she starts dissolving into her rainbow body. And I thought that the director of the film did an excellent job of showing a body dissolving into the rainbow body. And I think that's a really good possibility that once we begin to access beyond maybe 20%, 30%, 40% of our brain capacity, that we will by then have an ability to transmute our body into light. And we will be looking within at our body's biological machinery, our natural capability of transforming our body literally into a stargate, which is what I believe the ancients believed that the purpose of the body was to begin with.
Yes, and I definitely agree with you that when she hit that 20% in the movie, she became very robotic. She was feeling the emotions like the kisses from her mother, but she was not showing anything of love, of consciousness, of anything like that. Like you said, she just had no feelings, no pain, and I don't think that's what would happen to us, because I would think that as an evolved being, we would pay more attention to love. We would have more to share, and more importantly, consciousness. I don't like how scientists try to separate spirituality from science when they look at things such as paranormal or extraterrestrials, because I believe consciousness is really the missing link. And I don't think you can study one without studying the other, which is what our mainstream scientists are doing. Now, we are coming to a break in a little over 5 minutes, but I'd like to stay with the Ark of the Covenant topic until we hit break, and then we'll go on to more topics. Going back to what you said, another thing, manna. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was a really interesting thing. For 40 years, Moses and the Israelites were wandering the desert, and they had this manna that they were being fed from, and that was sustaining them literally with nothing else for 40 years. And I thought that was really interesting, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I really loved Lawrence Gardner's book about this, where he really started opening up the idea that the ancients, especially the Egyptians of the 18th dynasty, had an ability to create this star food or celestial food that fed our light body. And whether or not they could actually create a substance out here or not remains to be seen, because ultimately I think it was from within our own consciousness that they were able to produce this food. And that's one of the keys here to looking at these stories, is to say, well, wait a minute, we're always trying to make things out here. We're trying to find the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, the manna, and we believe we're going to be able to create something in a lab or wherever through alchemy or whatever means. But part of the message that gets lost in this is that it's our body that is capable of manufacturing this, and that we have this cosmic connection already within us, and that once we're able to awaken these centers within our own body, then we can actually create this star food ourselves. Now, I don't know exactly how to do that yet. I'm certainly on the trail of pursuing that, along with the oil that dissolves our body into light. But I do know that by really getting into these stories in a deep way, we're going to be able to get the clues that will ultimately enable us to do this.
I'm also glad you brought up the light beings and going back to also the manifestation. I believe you're right. First of all, if we resonate a higher frequency, that the other dimensions or other density beings are of light. And again, if we can get to that level, then obviously that's where we would shed our physical bodies. I would think and that's why when we pass to the other side, I think that's what we are, is essentially light beings. But going back to manifestation, you're right. People are always looking for the outside things, but it's really within that we can make all the changes. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit more. What can you tell all the listeners out there of what they can do themselves to start manifesting things for themselves?
Well, first of all of this is supposed to be hidden, right? And so we want to begin by just asking for revelation. I mean, hidden doesn't so much refer to something that's concealed. It means secreted. It's secret. And so we have to just begin to look within ourselves and ask our higher self for the power to secrete these secrets, whether it be the hidden manna or whether it be the oil of transformation. Ultimately, what we're trying to do with this is to kickstart our internal systems that can produce the hidden manna or secrete the manna or the oil that produces what's called our glory body or our light body. And it's connecting with this glory body that is, I think, the real key. And so what I've done in my books is collected is many of the really powerful images of human transformation into light. The Tibetans refer to it as the rainbow body of light. And in my books, I've got several tankas that have been gifted to me that I offer as literally open eye meditations that the Tibetans say is the manner in which the teaching of the glory body or rainbow body is transmitted. And so by connecting with that aspect of ourselves, it puts us on the path towards being able to fully self-realize these capabilities. Our essential dilemma, whenever I show presentations and I put up images of the rainbow body or the light body or resurrection body, I always comment about a cartoon I saw once of two caterpillars looking up at a butterfly, and one says to the other, "You'll never get me up in one of those things." And that's our fundamental dilemma, is that we so deeply connect with the pupil phase that we inhabit in our flesh and blood bodies that we forget that within us is this glorified light being that is metaphorically the butterfly. And so the first step for everybody is to get out of the pupil phase and begin to connect with our butterfly phase by meditation on these images of the resurrection body, light body, or rainbow body.
And with that note, Mr. Henry, I want to tell everybody out there, hang tight. We are going to take a short break. We're going to pick this right back up when we come back, as well as taking your calls. Stay tuned. More from William Henry. All right. Welcome back to Hour 2 with William Henry, everybody. It's been a fascinating Hour 1, and of course, we got so much more to talk about. But this hour, of course, we will be taking your calls. Of course, you could still leave tweets or send Skypes. Either way, we will be taking them. The call-in number is 818-923-1713. Again, 818-923-1713. One more time, 818-923-1713. And again, like I said, you can send them out via tweets or as well as Skypes. And again, let's give you some real quick news again about what's loaded on YouTube. Again, the Richard Dolan, Dr. Greer, and John Lear interview are up. The Daniel Brinkley and Ernesto Ortiz will be up in a matter of days, as well as the Paul Hellyer. And of course, I want to remind everybody next week that we will also be having the Honorable Paul Hellyer back, as well as a week from today, Dr. Bob Wood, and this Thursday, Eric Von Doniken and son of Oliver Stone, Sean Stone. With that being said, we have our first caller. Caller 818, keep your background music off, please.
Real quick music.
Caller,
From
818,
from what I'm
818, turn off your background music, please.
Dr. Greer and John interview.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
There you go. Well, welcome to the show. And what's your name?
Hello, my name is John Vogt.
Yes, you got any questions to Mr. William Henry?
Yes, Mr. Henry, I follow your series on Gaiam TV, The Arcanum, and I'm very fascinated with it. It's amazing. I just want to tell you about an experience I had with the third eye. I'm one of Drunvalo Melchizedek's teachers, The Awakening of the Illuminated Heart.
Cool.
Are you familiar with his work?
Yes, I am. Mm-hmm. Not deeply, but I'm
Okay.
familiar with it. Sure.
Well, I practiced the Merkaba meditation for about 4 years, almost every day. So it was an amazing experience. But in one of his workshops, I did a meditation where we had 5 people, and we were supposed to just, we had a blindfold on, and we're supposed to go inward and have the intention of bringing their hearts into our hearts. That was it. And in that meditation, first I saw a 2-dimensional eye of Ra, then I saw an eye of a bird, which had a bunch of different colors. Then, no joke, I'm wide awake, I have the blindfold on, and I see a 3-dimensional eye looking at me. And it's moving like fast twitch muscles, kind of like scanning me for like 45 seconds. And then I had a vision of a Vesica Pisces, like a portal, like a TV screen opened up, and it showed me a red rock on fire. And it was the most vivid thing I've ever had happen to me in my life. And the rest of the story gets kind of long about how it guided me to back to kind of a prophecy of what was going to happen to me. But have you ever heard of anything like this happen to anyone else, seeing a 3-dimensional eye and scanning you and giving you like a future thing that was going to happen?
I've actually had a somewhat similar experience in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. While meditating in the King's Chamber once, all of a sudden I had this blue eye that manifested 3D in my mind's eye. It was beaming bliss at me. That's the only way I can describe it. And I left the pyramid and I realized that it was the Eye of Horus. And I knew at that moment that, wow, something really profound had happened, and I knew that it was going to take me a little bit of time to unravel what just transpired. And ultimately, I came upon the research of a physicist named John Kramer. He wrote about wormholes, and this was just back like 1989, 1990 or something like that. He wrote an article in Alternate View. It was a sci-fi journal. And what he proposed was something really interesting. He said, okay, let's pretend you're this arbitrarily advanced civilization, and you're of course you're not going to travel the stars in spaceships. What you're going to do is you're going to send out a beam, and that's going to be able to search the cosmos for intelligent life. And if it found something of interest, that perhaps this beam then would be able to transform itself into a particle that would be able to enter into the consciousness of whatever intelligent life form that it came upon, and that if it liked this life form, that it would be able to open. This particle would then open into a size of a wormhole, into which this intelligent life form could enter into and travel to the place of origin, or through which beings at the place of origin would be able to come to Earth. And so when people tell me about experiences such as what you had and what I had, I wonder if in fact that could have been like perhaps some kind of intelligent consciousness that was interviewing me or interviewing you and exploring your consciousness and perhaps offering an invitation to go through the Vesica Pisces, through the eye of the needle, into another place or another space and space-time.
Right. Well, basically, the interesting thing that happened, you say it was like teaching or someone looking at me. I left one of his basically workshops because he said the teachings will come from within you. And I was like, okay, great. I'm paying $1,000 for the teachings to come from within us. I'm here. I thought I was going to pay for teachings, right? So basically, I left and I saw the Red Rock on fire, and it led me to a casino that was called the Fire Rock Casino. I went in there.
Oh, cool.
I won a bunch of money. I hit jackpot 4 times, and basically got all the money for the workshop and all the money for my whole trip. So basically, I went back to the workshop and told the story, and I realized that the teachings do come from within us. And I'm guessing that was the eye of the heart, or the eye, the kingdom of heaven is within. And the whole idea of if your whole body is filled with light, the eyes should be one.
Right.
I feel like I've seen that eye, and I've connected to it. But it's been 4 years since I've seen it, and I'm just like, why can't I see it again?
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's been 15 years since I saw it, too, and every time I'm in the King's Chamber, I try to have that experience again because it's so profound, and it hasn't happened yet, but I hope it does one day.
Yeah.
Let me throw one thing in. The King's Chamber, obviously, that's a very sacred place. Do you think the reason why, Mr. Henry, you had that there was because of the location, or was it just the circumstances of which you were meditating?
I do think it had something to do with the location. In fact, after that initial experience, we went down to Luxor, and we were in the museum down in Luxor, and I went into the gift shop, and here's this little 2-inch tall golden pyramid that they were selling in there that had the blue eye of Horus exactly in the location of the King's Chamber. And I put 2 and 2 together and got 5 and thought, well, hey, maybe the eye of Horus, the blue eye, actually symbolizes the consciousness or software of the pyramid itself, and perhaps I connected with that consciousness during that experience.
Total synchronicity, and I'm a firm believer of that. 818, you have any more questions for Mr. Henry?
That's it, man. Keep doing what you're doing, William. I really appreciate you, all the research you've done. I really connect and vibe with what you're doing. I appreciate it. God bless you, man.
Well,
okay, you too, and thank you so much for listening, and I'll pass along the word to Claire, too, that you enjoy the show.
Cool,
Thank you for calling 818. And anybody out there, if you have any more calls, of course, again, call us 818-923-1713. Again, 818-923-1713. 1713, or an easy way to put it is 818-923-1713. And again, you could also send them to me on Twitter with the hashtag DMChat, as well as on Skype. And with that being said, let's go back to what we were discussing and close that out and get to the trip that you had in Italy. One thing I like to mention about manifesting is remote viewing. And I think the two are linked together because there's actually a remote viewer who is teaching about manifesting your everything you want essentially within yourself. And in order to get to his level of teaching how to manifest, he has to teach you about remote viewing first. Do you think there's a correlation among the two, or is this just this person speaking on it himself?
No, I think there is a correlation, Dr. J, because what you're ultimately getting into are some of what are called the she powers, the advanced human powers that include remote viewing, manifestation, levitation, bilocation, this sort of thing. So I think that they go together in a way and are sort of bundling the potential of our consciousness to perceive the future as well as to manifest it. And that's part of the capabilities of humans that are climbing or ascending the ladder to heaven, if you will.
Exactly. And I believe that ascending, it all has to do with us unlocking the potential in our brain and using more of our pineal gland, or some as would call it, our spiritual antenna, and really reaching the light, the different rainbow light that you were speaking of. And this is a perfect segue of the Shroud of Turin and your trip that you made with your wife, Claire, to Italy. Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, actually, it's an impending trip. We're going to be doing this in April 24th to May 5th of 2015. The Shroud of Turin goes back on display publicly for the first time since 2010, and probably for the last time, certainly in the next 25 years, according to the church, and perhaps for the last time at all. Because I think there's a real understanding afoot now from the scientific community, or at least the open-minded scientific community, that the Shroud of Turin is actually the authentic burial shroud of Jesus and represents his manifestation of the light body. And what we're starting to appreciate is the actual significance of what we're dealing with the Shroud of Turin.
One thing I love when I interviewed Dr. Silverman, first of all, I want to say two things. Before I mention Dr. Silverman, the Shroud of Turin, when they talked about the carbon dating, it really upset me when they're like, oh, well, it's only a few hundred years old. Well, obviously, it's been written and several people have spoken about this. Well, if you're taking the outer corner of it, it has been repatched. You're not actually testing where the light appeared. So I think that when those debunkers are trying to say, well, this can't be from 2,000 years ago, I think they were completely wrong. So I wanted to throw that statement out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest scientific blunder or con of certainly the past 100 years, maybe even of all time. I mean, total idiocy to take a piece of the shroud when people know that was from it when it was repaired and try to proclaim that the shroud is inauthentic because of that. It's ridiculous. And I think we're starting to get beyond that finally, and people are starting to ask some serious questions once again.
Exactly. And one thing I really appreciated when I spoke to Dr. Silverman was I found out he was Jewish. And yet when he started looking at the Shroud of Turin, he was looking at it objectively, and he fully became convinced that Jesus Christ, if that was who was, and I firmly believe it was, that was wrapped, the shroud was wrapped in, clearly turned into light and made that imprint. So we have someone who is from a different faith that is looking at this and saying this being was a light being, or transformed to the light being, a level above us, and made this imprint. And I thought that was fascinating for him to come to that conclusion.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's Dr. Silverman who says that for a moment he shone brighter than the light of the sun, which is astounding. And Dr. Isabel Picek and others are physicists that have come along and follow along the same path. They've now determined that if it was Jesus, and let's say that it was, because I believe it was too, based on the evidence of the beating and the other corresponding wounds that we see on the shroud, they correspond perfectly to the biblical description of what happened to Jesus. There is no other that we know of historical description of a person crucified that was laid on a linen shroud like this that has actually been discovered by archaeologists or scientists. So we have to at least give a really serious consideration that this is the actual burial shroud of Jesus, and that he did in fact dematerialize into light, as is proposed in the resurrection mysteries of Christianity, which of course are derived from those of the Tibetans, the Egyptians, and even from ancient Iran. And the thing about it is that we now know that a lot more about these resurrection mysteries by being able to go into these various traditions, as I mentioned, the Tibetan and the Egyptian and others, and we're starting to understand the mechanism that the human body is literally designed to be a stargate or a wormhole. And this is the terminology that physicists are starting to use in correspondence with the shroud. We know that he was levitating, for example, now when the image on the shroud was formed. They know this because the image itself is perfect. There's no distortion around the edges of the body. He was levitating. and momentarily bursts into light, leaves this imprint. And this is what leads to the power, the real power of the shroud, and the reason Claire and I are taking a group to experience the shroud, as we had an opportunity to do back in May of 2010. The Catholic Church has never fully authenticated or proclaimed the shroud, the burial or winding sheet of Jesus, but they are starting to telegraph some very important beliefs about the shroud. And they're doing this by labeling it an icon. Going back to 2010, Pope Benedict called it an extraordinary icon, an icon written in blood. Pope Francis said something similar, describing the shroud as an icon of a man scourged and crucified, and that it causes us to, or invites us to contemplate Jesus of Nazareth. The word icon is extraordinarily important in this context because in Christian speak, Catholic speak, an icon is perceived as having extraordinary metaphysical powers. It's literally a living image that functions as a portal or a gateway, and it can also transmit spiritual power. An icon, again in Christian speak, is a two-way mirror. It's literally a method of communication with the invisible or divine realms. So in my view, with these popes calling the shroud an icon, they're telling us exactly what it is. It is a living communications device. It's a portal that can transmit the power, the spiritual power of the resurrection or transformation of the body, the human body, into light. This is why, by the way, that the Knights Templar, for example, are so highly revered the shroud. That we now know that the Templars wore a linen strand around their waist, around their belt. The average Templar had no idea why they did it, but what they did know was that this linen strand gave them spiritual power and ultimately provided for them protection as well as assurance of their afterlife. And what we now know is that those linen strands were charged by placing them in contact with the Shroud of Turin, as if the shroud itself was capable of transmitting this spiritual vibration that has literally the power to transfigure the human body into light.
And I'm glad you mentioned several things. First of all, the Templars wearing that strand clearly shows that they understood the power of the Shroud of Turin, and therefore either symbolically, because it may not have been obviously the same linen as the actual shroud unless they cut pieces off, they believed that they would have the same power and be able to transcend to where Jesus went. And going back to Dr. Silverman's statement, I thought that was really amazing when he said that too, that at some point that the light was stronger than the sun. We do have one question that just came in via chat here. I'm going to read it to you. Is there a DNA result for the shroud, and is there such thing as a God DNA?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, you have some clever book titles to that effect, but I don't know how you would actually be able to determine that for certain. So no, I can't say with any certainty that that's true.
Back to the shroud. Again, the icon written in blood. I thought that was another fascinating statement because icons, I'm Greek Orthodox, and it's very close to Catholicism, and they're very important in our religion because they represent, saints. We have icons of the Virgin Mary and, of course, of Jesus Christ. But this being the actual closest thing you can get to an icon, because it's further. It goes further than any portrait of anyone, because this is something that actually touched a being of light. And I think that's why it is probably the most remarkable piece of religious history that we can ever have.
Yeah, I mean, it's really phenomenal to when you follow this mindset, and it's something that we've lost, of course, when icons. We went through a period of iconoclasm when all of a sudden the new religion of Islam came along, and the Islamic scholars turned to the Byzantine Church fathers and said, "Y'all are basically a bunch of idol worshiping hillbillies." Islam doesn't make any representations of the face of Muhammad. This is why we have so much problems right now with what happened with the Jesuit Charlie scenario in Paris just a few weeks ago. It's because it's absolute heresy. It's blasphemy to make an image of Muhammad, or especially Allah. And here were the church fathers saying, well, we have this, we worship panel icons. We believe that when we pray before a panel icon of the transfiguration of Jesus, when he metamorphoses into light, that vibration of the transfiguration can be transmitted to us through the icon. They viewed that as idol worship, but it's not. It's actually a way of doing the divine work. It's a technology that is quantum to its core. And when the Pope says that when we look at the Shroud of Turin and we see as in a mirror our suffering and the suffering of Christ, what he's effectively saying is that the shroud itself is capable of mirroring to us or transmitting to us the vibration of the holiness that Jesus brought, but also of the vibration of the resurrection itself. And this triggers biologically, physiologically, a whole process within us. We know this beyond a shadow of a doubt, that when people are praying before an icon of the Transfiguration, that mirror neurons in the neocortex are firing. We are experiencing at a certain level, a deep level, exactly what Jesus experienced in the Transfiguration. And if we can create the right circumstances through additional prayer, meditation, maybe even the use of certain substances or oils, what if we could accelerate that process and even begin to feel even more dramatically that vibration of the Transfiguration? I mean, if that's the case, then that's a real challenge to the church hierarchy in itself. What do you need, as Carlos Santana said, a pope, a priest, a politician, or a pimp for? You don't need any of that. All you need is the image, and this is terminology that the Gnostics used in the Corpus Hermeticum, one of the ultimate mystic Christian texts, that said the image itself will show you the way, and enter through the image. What they're saying is that the power of these icons and images is such that it can open portals or gateways into the divine realm, and you can begin to embody that vibration just by meditating on these images. And so the question is, are the material world and the spiritual world open to each other through these icons, and especially the Shroud of Turin? I mean, how far can we really stretch this? I think we can stretch it all the way to the fact that the Shroud of Turin has the capability of providing a vibration of holiness that can transform us on contact.
If only we were all allowed to see it. I know it's obviously a display for a short time, and as you mentioned, I hope it's not the last time, but it's very possible it could be. And obviously, they've kept this hidden, and when they release it, you don't get to see it very often unless you make a pilgrimage out there. But at the same time, I would hope that we can all have an opportunity to get to it, because, like you said, I think that if we meditate at it, or praying, or as some people call it praying, I think it's actually almost the same thing. You know, when you meditate, you're praying.
I agree.
Exactly. If we are able to do that with the Shroud of Turin in front of it, and have what's resonating from it, then it will help us, like you said, unlock our chakras, and more importantly, get us to that next level and get our pineal gland working further than what it would be without it.
Yeah, because here's the thing, and here's where my interest has really been focused on, and that is that throughout the ages, there's been an emphasis on the prophets, the great mystics, whether we're talking Elijah, John the Baptist, Jesus, Mary Magdalene in the Judeo-Christian tradition, Osiris in the Egyptian, and others, they describe a transmittable robe, coat, or garment of light that represents the craft of human transformation into light. Elijah possesses this. He goes up into, famously around the 8th century BC, maybe 6th century, he ascends into the heavens in a whirlwind, which to some is, if Giorgio Tsoukalos were talking tonight, he'd say that's some kind of flying Toyota or tricked out Benz. I don't agree. I don't think it's a UFO, a spaceship, anything like that. I think it's what the ancients called the Merkaba throne, the Merkaba vehicle, a light vehicle, an organic light vehicle developed by his body. It's the next manifestation of our body. So Elijah is going up in this whirlwind, and he turns to his priest Elisha and transmits to him his holy garment. It's some kind of a transmittable coat or garment. I don't think it's an actual garment, like a coat you wear when it's cold outside. I think it's a symbol of a transmittable vibration, a vibration of holiness that represents the ancient keys, literally a key or vibration that allowed Elijah to be transported from one location to another. He could raise the dead. He could command the elements, including rain, and he could especially baffle world leaders with his immense powers. And then he ascends in this Merkaba whirlwind. Well, Elijah is known to have reincarnated as John the Baptist and he reacquires this transmittable garment, and he transmits it to his cousin, Jesus. And then Jesus puts on the garment and demonstrates his abilities to utilize it in his transfiguration and ultimately his resurrection. This is the same cloak or garment of the mighty ones, the giants of the Old Testament, the Nephilim, the angels, the watcher angels. I mean, some people think that the Nephilim are giants and they're 12 feet tall and have elongated craniums. That's a possibility, but the myths are also extremely clear that they were called mighty ones or giants because they possessed this cloak of many colors, this cloak of light. So here again, if you're chasing the giants, the mighty ones, as 12-foot and 14-foot beings with elongated skulls, chances are you're not looking to acquire this transmission of light or this vibration that is inherent within the Shroud of Turin and is described in these other traditions that ultimately will allow you to adopt a body that could bend space and time, dematerialize, rematerialize in another location, remote view, levitate, all these other capabilities that are inherent within this power garment or miracle garment.
And essentially powers that I believe we can unlock. And going back to the movie Lucy, if we were able to activate all our chakras and use our pineal gland to its fullest extent and have these powers, I think every single person can be capable. And this is exactly why I brought you on the show the first time. And this is why the listeners had demanded that we bring you back, because you are really leading the forefront of this. And I advise everybody out there listening, be sure to follow WilliamHenry.net as well as his teachings on Gaiam TV, because you will be learning how to do this for yourselves. And I just wanted to throw that in there because I think it's really important. And this
Thank you, Dr. J. And this actually brings us full circle to where we began, because this same power garment, miracle garment, robe of light, is exactly what the Digerati believe they can create with Bang technology, bits, atoms, neurons, and genes. This new skin, the skingularity, is the technological version, duplication of this garment, because they believe that once we have this new skin, we will be able to change our skin color. If you want to be purple today, do you want to be brown, black, white, rainbow colored? No problem. Touch of a button, nanotechnology reconfigures, you got a different colored skin. You want to be iridescent, you want to glow, fine, no problem. We're even going to redesign what the human face looks like with this technology. We're going to have all kinds of appendages coming off, all kinds of things like that. We're going to have the ability to make ourselves invisible. That's all been in the news, especially the Japanese are leading the way in creation of an invisibility cloak like Harry Potter. These are all of the capabilities of the mighty ones as described in the Old Testament and in the teachings. And one of the things that they did with this mighty power garment, why did they want this mighty power garment? Well, because this mighty power garment gave them the ability to ascend what they called the Tower of Babel, or the Stairway to Heaven. The Stargate of the Gods is the term that I used for it. The two go hand in hand. And so you have to ask, if the Digerati are intent on recreating this garment of light, this power garment, this power cloak, what's their thinking in terms of stargates and wormholes as well? They must be thinking about that as well.
One thing that really scares me, again, is as you mentioned, this Digerati and DARPA, they're trying to make all these intelligence and technologies which will emulate the powers that our ancestors had, the Nephilim had, of course, Jesus had. But the problem is they're going to use them for military applications because we are primitive in that sense, rather than going above, which I think if we evolved, and that's exactly if people follow your teachings and people unlock their chakras and do what we're supposed to do and actually love each other, we wouldn't be fighting on the levels that we are. This primitive tribal warfare is holding back our evolution. And I fear that exactly what they're doing is going to backfire on us because of the fact they're using it for military applications.
Well, and this may be why there could be this cosmic reset button. I mean, remember last year, NASA announced that in July 2012, we were 1 week away from getting nailed by a massive coronal mass ejection from the sun that would have effectively sent us back to 1865 in terms of the power grid. When the Carrington event happened, it would have wiped out the power grid as we know it. So perhaps there is a cosmic force that is watching this and seeing that, hey, we're 3 minutes to midnight right now, and if the Digerati have their way, they're going to be able to push that forward. Maybe there will be some kind of cataclysmic event from the outside that will slow down this process. I don't know. I used to try to be kind of neutral about it, because when you think about it, Dr. J, these four technologies that are converging, bits, atoms, neurons, and genes, are simply digital versions of what we used to call earth, air, fire, and water, the four elements of which our bodies are composed. So maybe this is how we're destined to do it at this time, is to recreate these technologies, play God with these elements, and ultimately weave ourselves this new body of light. But more and more, I absolutely realize that what's missing here is the fifth element, which is spirit or soul. There is no soul in any of this technology. In fact, it ultimately appears that it's designed, as we discussed a moment ago, to consume our souls. So what do we do? Do we throw away our cell phone? Do we disconnect ourselves from the internet? That's certainly one possibility, or one choice that we may have to make. How do we slow this down? These are questions that we're going to have to address here pretty immediately. And the thing is that there is no global conversation about this. This is not being discussed in any kind of concerted way where we've got spiritual leaders are involved. I mean, in fact, the religious and spiritual leaders are just completely oblivious to most of what we're talking about here.
I think they're both oblivious, and at the same time, they don't want us to talk about it because of the ramifications. Obviously, we will take them out of power because their power, the elite, is the wealth and the control and the fear-mongering and all that. I think once we're able to achieve that higher density by having these powers, they don't want us to. They want us to stay numb. So I think it's both them being oblivious, and at the same time, I think it's a conscious decision not to have us. That's just my opinion. I do have a question here from a listener. I'm going to try to read it, and hopefully it'll make precise sense. It might go back to what we were saying a few minutes ago. This is from a direct listener. It says, can I spiritually spiritually reconnect to my ancestry once taken, or will we be slaves like Jesus told us about not taking it? Or is it a spiritual or a higher adaptation? Concuse is what he wrote, adaptation.
I missed that last bit, Dr. J.
Or I'll read it again. Can I spiritually reconnect to my ancestry once taken, or will we be slaves like Jesus told us about not taking it? Or is it a spiritual or higher adaptation?
Yeah, I think you can reconnect with your ancestors. It's in your DNA, and in fact, maybe that's what's being called upon by the person who's asking the question to follow that path, to look to that aspect within ourselves, because anything that we're trying to do from the outside is usually going to have some element of control with it.
We have about 20 minutes left, and I want to go on to other issues, but at the same time, I love what we're talking about, so I want to go a little bit more on this. I'm really glad you brought up this DNA and ancestry, because I think people are finally starting to understand that memories really are passed down through DNA. And this is, I believe we have our instincts, but at the same time, the reason why we may have our instincts is because they're encoded in our DNA from our ancestry. Do you believe that?
Yeah, I do. And I also believe in that idea that we can change our family tree, meaning our family vine, our family DNA. There are several traditions that say we can go back, and the actions that we make in our present life can influence our DNA going back 7 generations as well as going forward 7 generations. So think about that, and the responsibility that we carry, as well as the opportunity that we have at this moment to shift and change. And if we don't like the course of our family vine, we can change it, and we can grow the grapes of the promised land if that's what we're looking for. And I think that's ultimately the aim of all of us. And they talk about in the Bible and spiritual traditions, they talk about the chains of judgment. The watcher angels, for example, were the angelic beings who disrobed from their angelic light bodies when they left the heavenly domain and became the fallen ones. The fallen ones means that they no longer live in the perfect place, the perfect spiritual place. They fell from that place, and they now are on earth and are kept in change of judgment for influencing human affairs. But these chains, I believe, are DNA, and we all have these chains of judgment from past actions of our family members and ancestors and so forth. But we have the ability to break those chains, and by doing so, we reclaim our original bodies of light and our original innocence and purity, if you will. And that's what we've left behind. So if we want to move forward, it's just the way forward is to focus on purity, to focus on love, and to focus on a word they use is perfecting ourselves, which means becoming more whole, more holy, more complete, more compassionate.
Mr. Henry, we are actually joined by another caller. I see the name. This is David Matherly. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Dr. J, how you doing? And hey, William Henry, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
You too as well, David.
Yeah, I just heard you guys talking about instinct being encoded into DNA, and I was wondering if you were familiar with the work of Rupert Sheldrake. He has a theorem or hypothesis of morphic resonance, which he claims better explains how our bodies are formed, and it does deal with racial, with what people consider genetic memory. But he claims that there has never been a gene sequence or a segment of a gene sequence that has been proven to encode for behavior or memory or form. He says that all DNA encodes for its production of proteins, period. And his morphic resonance hypothesis is that there's a field around us, a very much sort of a spiritual sort of field that forms each living thing based on its genetic code. So the genes allow the organism to tune into this field of morphic resonance, and the field of morphic resonance forms the life form into what it is. I was wondering if you're familiar with that at all.
No, I've read about it in years past, but I haven't seriously looked at it. But I think I'll take your tip and we'll look into it, though.
Cool. Yeah, you guys just reminded me about it when you mentioned that the genes were encoding for instincts. He claims that there has never been a proven segment that actually can be identified as an instinctual code. So birds tweet from some other force or some other field being tapped into. Babies cry when they're hungry for the same thing, and that our brains are basically receiving units of this field, and they tell us how we should behave and which instincts we should have based on this eons-old program that's been developed through the existence of all life, as well as, and in particular, for us, our ancestors. So our ancestors, and the reason why he says this is because he has trained rats to walk a certain maze, a very, very complicated maze. It takes a long time to get the rats to learn this maze, but once the rats in, say, New York City learn the maze, rats in Tokyo learn it easier because they tap into what those rats in New York have learned.
Ah, interesting.
He says so I just thought I'd throw that in there. And this is a great show, by the way. You guys have got me captivated. So excellent show, Dr. J.
Well, thank you for listening.
Thank you. And this is exactly why I wanted William Henry back. And, of course, this is why the listeners, when I asked, who do you want next, William Henry came up. Now, we are getting close to the last a little over 12 minutes or so. And I wanted to, we could stay on this, but I wanted to go on to your next tours. You're going to be going to France and then Egypt. You want to talk a little bit about France or go to Egypt, or which one do you prefer?
Yeah, sure. Well, we can do both, maybe. I've been going to the Languedoc region of southern France since, 1996, following the Holy Blood, Holy Grail line and the bloodline concepts, as well as the what I call the grapes of the promised land, the search for the ultimate mystic secrets of Christianity, which many believe are actually going to be found in the area around Rennes-le-Château, the Cathar mysteries, and so forth. So Claire and I are leading a tour to southern France June 4th through the 15th, and would love to have anybody join us. It's a wonderful experience and time to reconnect to these wonderful Grail mysteries that are there, the Cathars, and awesome place of beauty, too.
And as a matter of fact, the Rennes-le-Château, that was one of our big topics that we spoke on last time. And for all you listeners out there, if you would like to hear that interview, that will be re-uploaded on YouTube as a recent link, unless you want to dig it up from the past. Let's go to Egypt, because there's something that really grabbed my attention there about this citizen who was doing some illegal digging and found a tunnel that actually goes to the oldest pyramid in the Giza Plateau. Specifically, let me read it. What it was: the Pyramid of Khufu. Can you give us the backstory of this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's for people who've been to Egypt, they're very familiar with the scene around the Sphinx and the Valley Temple. And the Giza Plateau, and you know that it's a very profound area, and today it butts up right against a couple of modern villages that are in total chaos, and literally the people's homes. There's a Pizza Hut and a Kentucky Fried Chicken and other businesses that for years people have been saying that these homes and these businesses are actually built on top of ancient temple sites, and perhaps even the actual entrance to the Giza Plateau itself. And lo and behold, you've got a gentleman who lives in one of these villages. El Haranaya is the name of the village, very near the Giza Plateau. He's digging 30-plus feet beneath his house, which is kind of typical in this area, actually. People are, underneath their rugs. They have tunnels that run into deep underground systems where they're looking for the actual tunnel system that leads up to the plateau. And it's been claimed and now verified by Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities that this gentleman found the long-lost causeway to the Great Pyramid, which is the processional gateway, if you will, leading to Khufu's pyramid, the Great Pyramid. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about this and claimed to have visited it as far back as the 5th century BC, and it's been lost ever since then. And it's just one of these stories that gives a lot of hope to those that believe that buried beneath the nearby village of Nazlat El Saman, that we will find what Edgar Casey refers to as the entranceway to the Hall of Records and other phenomenal mysteries of the Giza Plateau. It seems that we of course have been in a time of revelation for at least 2 decades now, and as part of the acceleration that we're talking about with the Dicharati and others, there's also an acceleration of our understanding of the ancient world, and it's as if these two parallel tracks are trying to come together. And I cite the recent discoveries at the Giza Plateau as a good example of that confluence, or that those two parallel lines beginning to merge into one.
I hate to go back, but we just got another question from a listener, and it goes back to a second. So I don't know if it quite relates to what we're going to, and I'm going to come right back to Egypt. It says, does William know of Ron Wyatt, who says he found the cave of DNA of Jesus in a cave? Found the DNA of Jesus in a cave.
I've heard of Ron Wyatt. He used to live here in near Nashville, where I live, but I wasn't aware of his claim to find the DNA of Jesus. I'll have to follow up on that.
Yeah, I figured I'd ask that. I haven't heard of that yet, but it'd be interesting. I remember there was a documentary by James Cameron, but totally unrelated. Going back to Egypt, and you mentioned, obviously, this Greek who in the 5th century BC found it, which proves that obviously it was lost for all these centuries until recently. And as you mentioned, that there's so much more that's hidden underneath. And as a matter of fact, doesn't it connect, or what's the connection to the Nile River? Because doesn't the Khufu Pyramid complex, wasn't it known to have been a connection to the river?
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. J. I mean, when you're standing with your back to the Sphinx, and on your left is the Valley Temple, which is perhaps a 10,000-year-old temple. It's composed of red granite. You're standing in front of you is the dock from the canal that used to connect over to the Nile. So water was the primary means of transport. They would literally come off boats from the Nile over to the Giza Plateau. And that's one of the great wonders of Egypt, is trying to just actually visualize what it actually looked like in its original form. One of my favorite things is that when you're going to some of the temples in Egypt, like Abydos and elsewhere, you'll often see paintings that show what these temples originally look like, and they're absolutely breathtaking. I mean, we have just no comprehension of the magnificence of the ancient Egyptian civilization, and what's left for us is just a very tiny fragment of that civilization. But my gosh, I mean, when you are able to connect with these temples and the energies, and for some people remember what it was like at those times, it's the most memorable experience of a lifetime. And it's no wonder that traveling to Egypt is on so many people's bucket lists. And Claire and I have had the privilege of taking literally hundreds of people to Egypt to re-experience the magic, the mystery, and the wonder of Egypt. And we hope to continue to do it for a very long time, because lately the energies are so much higher now. The crowds have been down in Egypt due to an economic hit job on Egypt. It's perfectly safe there. The Egyptian people are so warm and welcoming, and to me, now is the time to be there, and now is the time for Egypt. And Egypt will be playing a very key role in the transformation of the Middle East. I mean, they are leading the way in the transformation of the Middle East, and I really try to support in any way I can their desire for peace and stability in that region.
With all your knowledge, I think it would be such a fascinating tour to go with you. And you're right. It's on so many people's bucket list. It's on my bucket list, that's for sure. Egypt is the next destination I intend on traveling. And I haven't left this country for a long time, but that is obviously where I plan on going. We do have another question here. I'm going to read you from the caller. And then we have a little over 5 minutes left, and I wanted to get to the watchers. And if we can touch on ancient aliens, okay. If not, no big deal. But it basically, do you believe the pyramids in Egypt are power plants, or are they something else?
I believe they're spiritual power plants. I mean, they obviously didn't have iPhones, iPods, and automobiles to power, so what were they generating that power for? I mean, I really like Robert Bauval's term for the Great Pyramid. It's a resurrection machine. It's a transfiguration machine. I really believe that. And I think that the Great Pyramid was the power plant, the core power plant for a lot of the temples, and they would transmit this spiritual vibration, maybe brought down from the galaxy itself, and that this infused the ancient Egyptian culture with this. It bathed it literally in this beautiful vibration of peace and harmony that enabled them to attain spiritual heights, at least for the pharaohs. It enabled their transformation from a human into a star, or a star being, a celestial being, but it also assured the prosperity of the civilization itself. It made it a truly green civilization, and that's something we're trying to reconnect with today. We think we're going to be a green civilization when we recycle and all-drive Priuses, but to the ancient Egyptians, they were green, and their civilization lasted for over 3,000 years because their focus was on rebirth, renewal, and resurrection. And oh, by the way, they had this incredible consciousness technology that enabled them to build massive temples with these unimaginably huge granite blocks, some of them weighing over 500 tons, that they appear to move around like Lego blocks. If we can recover that consciousness and that technology, we're talking about a whole new way of life, and it ultimately, to me, represents the way forward for us.
I agree, and this is why I think we're coming full circle, and I agree with what the statement you made earlier about Egypt being where it'll stabilize the Middle East, because I think if we go back and actually look at what they've done there and truly understand, then obviously we will finally reach the level that we should be at and stop these primitive tribal warfare, maybe end this digital warfare from the digerati, and stop this singularity and all this other stuff. Sadly, we are about out of time. We have just under 2 minutes, and I wanted to give you a moment to tell for the next 2 minutes what's next for you, of course, where people can find you, and about your next book.
Great. Well, my website is williamhenry.net, and I invite everybody to visit me there. And what's next is my wife Claire and I are actually writing a book about the Shroud of Turin, which we hope to have completed here later this spring. It's a little bit different take on what you get from other Shroud books. We are focusing on the Shroud as an icon, as opposed to a relic, which appears to, which most people interpret as something that's kind of inert and lifeless. We think it's actually a living icon. So, focusing on that, we're also doing quite a bit of research, as always, on the light body effect. I've been doing some traveling recently, doing presentations and workshops on helping people to activate their light body in an effort to keep back the power of the predators, of the archons, and to claim their spiritual power, because this is what this time is ultimately all about. I mean, we are called upon right now to do some really heavy lifting not just on behalf of ourselves, but on behalf of the people who really don't understand what's going on in our world. And thanks to people like you, Dr. J, and the listeners, we're building, to go back to what the one caller said, that morphic field around this idea, and building a new field of possibility. And that's what our work is about at the present time and will continue to be in the near future.
And this is exactly why I love having you on as a guest, and we will definitely have to continue this again. William Henry, it has been a true pleasure. Everybody out there, I hope you enjoyed it. He will be back. And again, don't forget, this Thursday, hear Eric Von Däniken, Hour 1, Hour 2, son of Oliver Stone, Sean Stone. And next week, a week from tonight, you'll hear Dr. Bob Wood. And then a week from Thursday, you will hear the Honorable Paul T. Hellyer, former Defense Minister of Canada, who also is the highest ranking member of the G8 countries to ever speak on these topics. And I think it's a very important show. You'll all enjoy it. And again, this is the People's Show. You tell me who you want to hear. Go to drjradiolive.com for more info and reach out to me there. And without being said, special thanks to Keith Rowland and Art Bell for Dark Matter Radio Network. This is Dr. J signing out.